Hey, Dan.
Hey, Julie,
Happy
welcome.
October.
Happy October. It is season 2, episode 2 of the Ahab Breakdown. I'm Dan Zitt, SVP of Content Production, Penguin Random House Audio, and co-creator of Ahab. And
I'm Julie Wilson. I'm also a co-creator of Ahab, and I'm our senior manager of digital production platforms. So we have quite the episode for you guys today, and I'm really excited to interview these two. As you all know, all these episodes are required. You're required to be here. They're all recorded and will be available on YouTube the following Monday. So if any of your friends miss them, don't worry. We love to have you here live, but if you miss it, you can always see it on Monday. Follow us as usual on Instagram, Clubhouse, Twitter, YouTube, etc. We're always hosting interesting events, always producing content that we think is going to be useful for actors. And as always, I love connecting with you guys on social media. So tag Ahab Talent and we will in any studio selfies, and we will repost that and just keep your content flowing. We'll keep getting to know you, and you guys can keep getting to know us via the breakdown.
And this is going to be an exciting one. I love talking to actors about character voices. So we're going to be discussing developing convincing character voices. Make sure that if you guys have questions, that you can ask them live in the Q&A part of the site. Don't put them in the chat. And make sure to upvote questions you guys think are really interesting, and we'll try to get to all of them. Obviously, there's always so many questions we want to get to, but we only have an hour with our guests, so there's only so many we'll get to. We'll try to give you as much information as we can. And then our favorite segment after our guests come on is VO Roulette. Later on in the episode, we'll bring someone on stage, our virtual stage, from the audience. If you're interested in being part of VO Roulette, just type it in the private chat, and if you're picked, that's all you'll need to do is just type that I want to be part of this. Alexis behind the scenes will reach out to you and say, we want to bring you on stage, and you'll be on our virtual stage. So I'm excited. Jules, let's get this episode started.
Let's do it. So my new favorite, second favorite, I guess, part of our episode, second to roulette, is content we ship. And I'm always listening to new content, and I have been watching a series that I'm absolutely obsessed with. It's called Tiny World. It's on Apple Plus. It made me get an Apple Plus account. It's narrated by Paul Rudd, who you guys may know is the voice or is the character of Ant-Man. And what it does is it basically features tons of tiny animals all over the world. You guys know I love nature, gardening, etc. But it's really cool. I think it's like a really cool connection between his character in another series and connecting him to content in this new series. And he's, of course, a fantastic narrator. And if you need some like homey, cozy content before going to sleep, it's like somebody read you a bedtime story. So check out Tiny World, Apple Plus.
I saw the trailer after you told me about it, and I became slightly obsessed with it. And I have a feeling I'm going to be subscribing to Apple Plus, one of the many platforms I've subscribed to already. But also, I love Paul Rudd and I love his voice. And people always think of Paul Rudd as just being, this kind of comedy actor, but he has such a soothing voice. He actually read an introduction for our version of The Wizard of Oz some years ago. Yes,
I didn't know
so
that.
he
That's a
has
great
read
fun fact.
audiobooks before, or at least parts of audiobooks. So I love Paul Rudd. Good suggestion. My suggestion this month is I decided, it takes a lot for me to commit to like a 22-hour audiobook. I mean,
Wow.
who has the time?
That's a lot.
And I have to listen to so much content in my day-to-day job, but like, I really wanted to listen to John Irving's A Prayer for Owen Meany. I'd read that book years ago. It's a charming book. John Irving's a brilliant writer. And I was really kind of conflicted because, there's a lot of younger sounding voices throughout that book. And the narrator, Joe Barrett, who I've known personally for many years, but never actually sat and listened to his work before. I am hooked on this 22, 24-hour book to the point where I'm probably going to get through it in like 2 weeks because Joe is just so successful at just carrying the narrative through the whole book, but also, creating voices for these kids throughout the book. And I think it's so hard for gentlemen, especially once you get to a certain age, to kind of like fluctuate between much older characters and much younger characters. And Joe does such an amazing job. So Prayer for Owen Meany, John Irving, just a beautiful, beautiful recording.
Sounds fantastic.
And then we also have this week, we like to bring people on. This is where we get excited. We want to bring a sample. We want to have a sample review every week from someone. And this week, instead of having one of our guests did it, we actually have a director, producer that we've known for many years named Erin Spencer to tell us about a sample that she listened to. So Alexis, I think you have a video of Erin talking about some audio that she's really excited about. Can we play that?
And this is a sample fresh from Ahab talent. She found this character. She found this actor on the site. So let's hear from Erin.
I was recently casting a romantic comedy audiobook, was on Ahab, and came across Sharon Friedman's romantic comedy demo. A few things stood out. It was written in first-person point of view, and right out of the gate, Sharon's character had a very strong opinion on what she was saying, which lent itself to the genre and was very funny. I love it when narrators have strong opinions and are making bold emotional choices. It allows me to connect to them and the story in a more meaningful way. I loved her use of breath. It was very organic and very human. And ultimately, it made me feel like I was listening to her tell me a story, not listening to her read me a story. I did think that the demo was long at 2.5 minutes. It could have been trimmed to 1:15. I heard everything I needed to hear in that first minute. Ultimately, she did a great job really understanding the genre, making strong choices, and in the end, it put her as a top contender for the job. I was
That's very cool. So we're going to listen to
Yeah.
this sample now just so you can hear what Erin heard. And we always think it's very cool to hear from different content creators because we all have different preferences, different opinions, and just it's showing you guys how we think through our casting process. So
And not only
let's
does
listen.
Erin have the best name for a company, One Night Stand Studio, I've ever heard in audiobooks, very creative name, but she's an extremely experienced director who's worked on award-winning audiobooks for us in the past. She's really fantastic. So I was happy that we could bridge the gap for her with Sharon. Let's hear Sharon.
Yeah, let's do it.
I can't believe the sort of bullies they hire as flight attendants nowadays. I know they've cracked down on security and everything, but this has nothing to do with the safety of the airplane, its crew, or the passengers. Hilda Trentworth, flight attendant, henceforth known to one and all as Hilda the Hun, is on my list. I'm going to formally complain about her, not only threatening to take away my frequent flyer miles. She can't do that, can she? But also the fact that she snapped at me and pushed me back into my seat when all I did was ask about the possibility of parachuting out of the plane so I don't have to be humiliated when Roger, after bursting into hysterical laughter upon seeing me, suddenly starts chanting, "Fat, fat, the water rat," as he dances around me. I don't even think she even asked Bob the pilot about dropping me off somewhere. I'm going to ask one of the other flight attendants, the ones who aren't Hun-like, if one of them will ask Bob for me. He sounds nice. I bet he will. Monday, Tuesday, who knows? August, whatever. Middle of the friggin' night, airplane from hell. Hilda the Hun just leaned over the old lady next to me to tell me that if I bother one more flight attendant, she'll see that I get off the plane. In the middle of the ocean, without a parachute. She is so going to get reported. Tuesday. Figured that out with the help of the guy sitting in front of me.
I think we can, Alexis, I think we can cut it there. I think we got a great sense of that.
I can't
Sharon
believe
sample. But the word that's, the word that stands out to me with that is commitment. You feel her intention in every sentence and her sense of humor. Oh, I love an actor's sense of humor when it calls for it. That is incredible.
Yeah, super dry. And it's like exactly what has to happen when it's first person narrative, right? Like she inhabits the character. She becomes this person. And, you know, I was empathizing with her the whole time. So I've had those tough flight attendants on occasion. So yeah, really excellent sample. I could see why Aaron chose her for sure.
Wow. I think it's time for us to introduce our guests.
All right. Well, I'm excited for this. So I've been doing this for about 25 years, but Marc Graue has probably been doing it double that amount of time. And Marc and I have kind of known each other only because we've both been in the voiceover industry for a long time, but we've never actually met in person that we both recall. So when we were looking for someone to come on to talk about character voices and talk about the VO industry from kind of a 360 view, I said, well, let's get this guy on that's been out there forever. So Marc Graue, please turn on your camera. I'm going to tell everyone who you are. Marc Graue has been a major force in the Los Angeles voiceover market for the last 40 years. As a performer, Marc can be heard daily on Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean ride and countless commercials, video games, cartoons, and as the narrator of Nat Geo's Alaskan State Troopers, which, you know, I've watched. Strangely, I have an obsession with Alaska and State Troopers for some reason. As the owner of Marc Graue Voiceover and Post, a Burbank landmark for the last 35 years, Marc has cast and directed thousands of commercials, recorded ADR for numerous films and TV shows, cartoons, video games, and has produced voiceover demos and coached many of Hollywood's elite. Marc Graue, welcome to the Ahab Breakdown.
I can't follow that. I'll just shut up and just sit here. It's like it can't possibly be that good.
Save it all.
Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure. This is great. You know, this industry as a whole is it's very tight knit, and everyone, even though you may not, like we were just saying, may not know somebody personally, and you know of them and you know their work, and you kind of, so when you do meet them, it's like meeting an old friend, and hey man, how you know, it's exactly. Like seeing someone from college again or something. So yeah. It's great. So it's kind of nice. So it's good to see you again, Dan.
Yes, welcome. Jules, bring on our other guest.
Yeah, so our next guest, I was really fortunate to hire for Serena Singh Flips the Script by Sonia Lally. So that's how I really came in touch with Ulka Simone Mohanty. And so her resume also just blew me away. Once I got to the end of it, I was like, well, we're both done. Dan and I will just leave now. We'll leave you two to talk about this entire thing. So a voracious reader, Ulka has always had an affinity for accents and voiceover and was thrilled to find a career in audiobooks, as we all are. As an actor, she acts in theater, film, video games, and TV, which include the character Loopy de Loop. I almost got that right. Loopy de Loop in Hanna-Barbera's Jellystone on HBO Max, several voices in the Pixar movie Soul, which I absolutely loved, the voice of Dr. Kapoor in NBC's Universal's award-winning kids TV show Nina's World, and is one of the official park voices for Disney's Animal Kingdom. So you guys have like great crossover Disney happening right now, which I'm very excited about. Additionally, she'll be appearing in a supporting role in John Ridley's upcoming sci-fi movie, Needle and a Time Stack. Ulka is also trained as an Indian classical dancer and is a choreographer, a cultural consultant for Disney. And in her spare time, when she's not doing all these amazing things, she moonlights as a private chef, a food stylist, and occasionally tutors in math, French, and physics. She also possesses a degree in computer science and linguistics from McGill University. So I'm signing off now.
And
guys.
Wow. What an introduction. And she makes Danzit feel way dumber now.
I was just saying, I'm so glad you introduced her after. That would have been a very tough act to follow.
Welcome, Ulka.
Welcome.
So thank you. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
So today we're talking about creating convincing character voices, and we thought you guys could add really interesting perspectives from, you know, different types of characters you voiced all over the years. So I guess to start, what is your guys' starting point for creating characters of all kinds? I'll direct that to you, Ulka. Why don't you kick us off?
Well, sorry. First of all, it's Ulka. I should
Ulka.
correct.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Okay, now I know.
Yeah. So I usually start with who's the hero, who's the heroine, and I sort of go from that. And that's my most natural sounding voice, because you have to consistently just have that voice narrate all the way through. So that's the voice that is usually closest to myself. And then from there, it depends on what the characters are. And I'll, you know, as a mover, a dancer, I it's very easy for me to physicalize things. So I might like put my body and posture in some kind of, like evil crotchety person, and I'll get into that position and voice from there. So it makes it easier to recollect later because I can just get into the position and then the voice sort of flows naturally. That's kind of my process.
I always find that to be so interesting how your body, even though it's a vocal audio medium, really does affect your performance. That's amazing
It's
to
a
me.
very physical
Absolutely.
craft.
Well, especially as a dancer, yeah, you speak through your body. I grew up as a dancer too, so I know that's the way you kind of experience the world.
Yeah.
Marc, how about you?
I'd like to talk about my dancing career. I apologize. I have no rhythm or talent. On it for me in the style of stuff I do, it really depends entirely on the project. I think the biggest thing with talking to people is they sometimes tend to immediately get very cartoony with a voice, and if it lends itself to that, that's fine. But it's like if you're doing an Irish dialect, and they'll immediately go into, "Hey, look at that pink hearts, yellow woods, and whatever these brown things are," and it's like, well, an Irishman would be going, "What the hell is that?" So it's, American ears go, "Oh, that's Lucky Charms," but depending on what the project is, and like you were saying, the physicality, absolutely. I was squinched over when we were doing Pirates of the Caribbean with one eye, kind of like, "I'll give you, that kind of thing, when you're all bent over and you're all rugged and nasty looking, kind of thing." And that physicality really does come into play. Absolutely. I think that's a huge, huge, huge portion of it. Absolutely.
So
Go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jules.
I was just going to tell you, Marc, that one of my favorite things about you is you voicing Pirates of the Caribbean. Favorite ride, voicing pirates. When I saw that on your resume, I was like, we have to have this guy on. He's an idol.
It was fun. It was a neat. We all knew, and of course, no pressure. Disney's going, "No, you realize this was the last ride that Walt was hands-on with. So you guys, and everybody's looking like, oh boy, okay, don't screw this up, Marc." So it was fun though. It was one of those sessions that you really came out and went, "Wow, that was fun. That was really a neat thing." Because I think we all grew up going on that, as kids,
Yeah.
and
You
still.
touched yeah.
So
Contact with many kids and their childhoods, for sure.
It's weird. So this weird 6 degrees of separation. My grandfather, of all things, designed the Jungle Cruise ride. So he's got pictures of Walt down in the trench and stuff. And I just thought, what an interesting full circle kind of thing. It was just kind of a weird, yeah.
That's amazing.
So Jules and I obviously come from the audiobook industry, where, when people are creating character voices, usually the actor may talk to the director a week in advance, say, "Oh, I'm thinking about this for this." And, then some people get to the studio and say, "Oh, this is my approach." And they'll say, "Oh, let's change that." But I'm interested in, and Marc, you can start, like, when you're working with clients in, the Disney space or, any of your other spaces that you're working in voiceover, how much input do your clients sometimes have on those voices before you even start with what your impression of the voice is?
Oh, lots. I mean, our job is kind of interpret what that is. Sometimes the interpretation is wonderful and you understand exactly. Other times it's kind of out there. It's that classical, I feel blue and I think it should be just have a tinge more red. It's like, okay, what does that mean? So there are, those, but yeah, they'll usually give you a very good jumping off point because they have an idea. They know what the project is, but a lot of the time too, it is very much collaborative. And so I think sometimes I think you're perfectly within your own to go, well, what about this? I always tell people, sometimes direction is very much like Pirates of the Caribbean. Well, it's not exactly rules, it's more guidelines. And it's like, they have a definite idea. Sometimes it's very specific, and other times it's a little looser. It's like, oh, that's an interesting thing. Let's try that. So
Ulka, have you had the same experience in your work?
Not so much. It's kind of been left up to me most of the time, now that I think of it.
Sometimes I'm going to go with your directors.
it might be more it could be like the books that I'm getting. Or maybe if I had auditioned for them, they're like, yeah, just do that. But there's sometimes, there was one book that I did with, on a whole panel of narrators called A Burning by Megha Majumdar. And the character I voiced was this character, Lovely, who was a trans person. And there's a lot of, it's done in first person, and her chapters were done in first person. And she also speaks. So we had made, the director and I decided, well, I think it would be interesting that just to keep it up to like have a much lower register voice while she's speaking to someone else out loud. But when it's her narrating, she sounds like the woman she believes she is. So there, we did sort of a two voice thing, and that helped with consistency as well. Because sometimes you can coast sort of back to your original voice and you have to bring it back. Yeah, but otherwise it's pretty much kind of been left up to me.
Do you find too, though, that they will occasionally, like if you do drift in a longer project, where they will play back, here, let me play you back where we were on that voice? Because I know sometimes if there's multiples, I'm an old guy, so it's like, you've got 12, 14 different voices. So what were we doing? Can I hear that back again? Oh, okay.
Yeah. I always think about Jim Dale. I mentioned him so much on this program, but like Jim Dale, when he was recording Harry Potter, which was like 180 voices or something, when I was sitting in the studio sometimes with Orly Moskowitz and listening to him work, and he would say, "Oh, give me Dobby again. Okay, there it is, and he'd just go, and but you'd have this kind of like 500 clips in front of you, like, give me him angry, give me this person this way, and having that, I think, is such a huge help. And we tell narrators all the time, if you're working on a book with a lot of voices, figure out tricks and cues for yourself, so that you can actually like get back into that voice quickly. Don't just assume you know it because you've read it on page 4 and now you're on page 70.
So that actually pulls up a great question from the audience that I know Matt Milano, I think you wrote this into the Eventbrite too. So he's asking, do you guys have any tips or tricks for quickly recalling and getting back into character? It might just be pulling up those voice samples, but how do you guys keep track? How do you prompt yourself? For instance, I know Cynthia followed up to say, yeah, what if I have a character voice on page 1 and I don't hear it again to take page 40? Any tips?
Well, usually for me anyway, usually they'll ask you to play back, but you can usually mark up your script. You'll know where you're going. For me, the hardest thing is when there's a lot of dialect, like back and forth stuff. So it's like I was doing a Star Trek, and I was fighting Captain Kirk, and we were doing the whole thing. And then they said, okay, now this other character, by the way, now you're talking to the character you just did. And it was like, ooh, okay, so now it's like, okay, this has to be so it doesn't sound like, where are you going? Over here, really? Yes, it's kind of, so it needs to be a little more genuine. And so that for me anyway is very helpful, that playback portion, to just kind of, oh, okay. Usually you kind of, the more you do this, you retain that, and kind of, you kind of remember where to go. But it's nice to have that too, because I've drift occasionally, and it's like, I thought I was right in the pocket, but evidently not. So it's kind of nice to have somebody ring in a little bit and go, oh, no, here. It's like, okay, good. So.
Okay, is that the same for you?
I can usually recall pretty well, and again, I get my body involved, so I'll get into a posture or sort of like skulk, or I'll do a lot of things that help me remember, I guess, holistically where the voice is at. And for longer books, or not longer books, but just if there are many characters, and there's one that doesn't appear until like 70 pages later, I might, and if I'm recording on my own, I'll just have like a little glossary of like, okay, this character, here's the chunk I recorded, and then I can always refer back to it. But usually I kind of do it on the fly, and it tends to work out.
Very cool. So in terms of characters, do you guys have a particular character that was very difficult for you to voice? That, like, what was the character that was the most difficult for you to voice?
Oh, I think I have a good one.
Okay.
One of the earlier audiobooks I did was called it was by the author Afton Brooks Zemansky, called Killer Potential. So the book is written, it's every other chapter. It's about this 17-year-old Yvette who goes through this pretty harrowing journey. And in the end, we're like, did she do it? Didn't she do it? Murder kind of thing. And so it starts off where she's 5 years old, and then we're the 17-year-old talks, and then chapter 3, it's she's 5.5, and then back to 17, then she's 6, and so I had to keep aging the character. So she started off as 5 and maybe like looking forward to life, and then switch back to the 17-year-old, and then I would have to age her, and also her mental degradation would start kicking in to end up at the end of the book as a 17-year-old in her mental state and age. So that was pretty challenging to do. I loved it. But it's definitely a challenge.
That's
like the Ethan Hawke movie Boyhood, where they filmed it over 15 years.
Yeah.
But surely the character's aging, except you have to age the character, which is completely
In the moment.
Yeah, in the moment.
great.
What about you, Mark? Did you have any really challenging characters?
For me, the most challenging was there's a dialect in, I guess, certain parishes of New Orleans called Yat. And it's a very roll-off kind of thing rather than typical Southern. It's kind of that thing where you don't actually say it's like, well, y'all come down like that, sit there and think y'all going to do the same thing. You know, kind of, it's like a mouthful of marbles kind of thing. And so it was kind of an interesting thing. And I actually worked with a dialect coach on that to kind of get, because I just felt like this really is a little out of, once it sinks in, it's like, it's like the light, oh, it's hooked on phonics. It's like all of a sudden it clicks and you're there and it's like, oh, okay, great. And it's a fun, I kept, I felt like I was channeling Strother Martin, we have a failure to communicate, that kind of. But yeah, it's just an interesting, and you want it to be very real, obviously, otherwise someone that actually speaks like that is going, well, that's not the way that is, and you run into that a lot. It's interesting. Nowadays, everything has become very, very specific, almost segmented, as far as that, where it used to be an acting job was an acting job. I never really gave, if the client would go, can you do this? I was like, sure, no problem. I made the mistake of the client asked me on a game, can you speak Cherokee in this one part? I went, certainly. And they had a coach. The guy gave me lines and I did it. And he thought, oh, man, that was great. Absolutely wonderful. A couple of friends were our Cherokee, but that was great. Well, boy, did the whoop hit the fan on that one. It was very much like, how dare you, you're not an Indigenous person. It was like, I'm sorry, my intention was not to offend anyone. It was just a job, and finally it got deeper. It was like, the client just said, will you do this? And I went, okay, I guess I shouldn't have, but.
Well, I think it's a good story to illustrate, how we or narrators need to be very sensitive to the content to the work that they're accepting. I mean, it's a really important point. I think for years in many different industries, people were being miscast because clients were like, oh, I want you to record this. And people were like, okay, it's a gig. But, we have to be sensitive about the work we choose.
Oh, sure.
And it's super important. But yeah,
I have a number of Spanish-speaking Mexican friends, because Mexican Spanish is a little bit different. In LA, for the longest time, they wouldn't. It was just like, oh yeah, can you transcribe that? Just we'll do a Spanish version, and they wouldn't. Now budgets are following. They're realizing, oh my goodness, what a huge. So they're actually spending money, and the voiceover talent is making money doing that. And so for the longest time, they were just kind of throwing that away. I say, well, this is a huge segment of the population, guys. Why are you,
Yeah. But I think, and you also touched on, in speaking about that accent from New Orleans, I mean, the authenticity and, you said, yeah, if I can't do it authentically, someone at some point is going to know this. And, what I think now with social media and everything, if you record an accent or a voice or that's just wrong, I know whenever I hear an accent, and I'm from New Jersey, and there's several accents in New Jersey, if I hear the accent that's supposed to be New Jersey, I get very frustrated when it's not,
but a lot of the
regional accents are really important to people, and now people can find you. So that's like important to know.
But a lot of the time too, a director, if they sign up and they go, that's great, love it. And then you don't want to go, no, it's not. And it's like, oh, great. Okay. If he's happy with it. And then you'll have somebody go, well, that's not what that was at all. And say, I apologize. I just was following his lead.
Yeah.
It wasn't malicious, but.
So generally, when clients don't really know what they want, do you both have kind of like a library of voices in your back pocket that you know you can do when a client is like, I don't really know what I want to do with this, and you're like, oh well, I can do this kind of thing, or I can do this kind of thing, or is it just kind of like, well, give me more information and then I'll kind of, you know, digest that and give you something that's pretty reasonable? But like, I feel like many actors I know are always working on voices in their head, or hear a voice and they're like, I'm going to keep that in the library for when I need it, when I'm doing a book or I'm reading or I'm, you know, doing some form of VO.
Well, for me, I do a lot of I have so many voices in my head that there's no real bank. But secretly, recently, I've been slightly obsessed with doing with like Werner Herzog and his like accent
Yeah.
and just way of speaking. And there have been a couple like thrillers where the murderer, the main murderer, he's strange and possibly from Europe, but we don't know where. I'm like, you know what? Werner Herzog. So I've made like a crazy kind of like, I'm just here to talk to you. I want to kill you maybe, but I don't know. And it's fun for me. And if it fits the character, that's my like little secret. Like just make it Werner Herzog.
So do you like go into the local cafe and order your matcha latte that way sometimes just for fun? Because
I would like a matcha latte that has been bruised by the negativity of the world, and just give it to me in a cup. I will drink it.
What about you, Mark? Do you have something in your library that you're always kind of pulling out when a client doesn't know whether it's kind of a more cartoonish thing or caricature or something?
Sure. I mean, you know, I play, the running gag is I never play the guy next door. I'm usually the guy that kills the guy next door. So it's like dead, mutated, possessed, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But it's very much kind of, you know, think on your feet. And I recently had a thing where, again, because of that, I do a lot of that gut, you know, and it's like all that nasty stuff. And so they booked me for a DC's Legends of Tomorrow, and it was like, and I'm thinking, okay, obviously she's possessed, you know, and here we go, and it's an homage to E.T., and it's this little cute character. There's 9 pages of ADR, and it's all efforts, and it's just, you know, kind of thing, little cutie, you know, and it was like, you know, internally I'm thinking, are you sure you got the right guy? You know, and it was fine. It worked out fine, but it's kind of be prepared for whatever. It's a little bit different style with stuff like this, because a lot of the time with this kind of VO, you don't really have the luxury to kind of work things out. Sometimes it seems like audio, sometimes you get a chance to work a little bit more on before you get rolling, and you have a little more levity. And these guys are pretty much, here's the picture. That's what you're doing. Okay. You know, so there's not a whole lot of area you could go there. You know, it's like it was saying, you know, I don't know, why don't you make them from Jersey? But that's not what they're doing, you know. So it's yeah, you give me something to call up. Sure, certain kinds of things in the guttural thing, and very wet, or is it real jowly? Down to that area, you know, or is it chesty, you know, kind of thing, or is it weaselly and kind of so, you know, it's a lighter kind. So it just really wherever, you know, kind of just, you know, and then their input too. Knock on wood, and hopefully it. You know, they don't say, get out of here. What are you doing here?
It's kind of interesting, Jules, because we don't usually ever have, unless it's a children's book and maybe there's some visual cues in the book for characters, you know, obviously narrators, you're looking for those textural cues on who you think this character sounds like, right? Like, oh, he's 6'4" from X place, and you know, he's very large and jowly, and all of a sudden you start kind of creating that voice from that description. Be great if we just had photos of all the characters in every book.
Love that.
Like, but I think our authors often do that. Well, they'll tell us, oh, I've always thought of this guy as Werner Herzog, right? Like, this is the person, that's who I think of. And you can kind of go with that. So I think it's always important to ask those questions when you're a narrator, like, how do you see this character? Because I can't put a picture, like I can't put a face to the description in the book. And sometimes authors will come back and say, oh, well, this guy's based on a guy I went to high school with, and this is what he used to sound like, and actors can then go do their thing.
Sure.
But I've never thought of it in our medium, how pictures could be really important to it.
When the direction is good like that and it makes sense, it's wonderful. When you work with a director that really kind of brings you over to their side and goes, here's what we're doing. It's like, oh, great. Okay. Because I've worked with directors who go, perfect. I love the size of them. Now make it sweatier. You know, and you're doing that actor, yeah, okay, and brain's going, what the hell does that mean? Like, you know, so it can be kind of interesting sometimes, and but you know, but I mean, there's all types, but usually it's a very collaborative thing, and I think most people, you know, doing stuff on your own is wonderful, and we all do, but it's very nice to have a live directed session too, that kind of, you know, there's a camaraderie and you realize that you're working on something together to an end product, and input is wonderful, you know, all of those kind of things. So and hopefully we're getting back to that slowly but surely.
Yeah.
Yeah, at PRH, we always have directors in the booth or in the virtual booth these days. So I think it just helps to keep the actors in the creative process and in those characters. And going back to visuals, I know that our director, Scott Cresswell, who also produces and directs not audiobooks, video games, he always has a visual for when he's casting the character. And I find that to be so cool. There's like a snapshot of who this person is and then the visual. And I'm also a very visual person, so I would love to have that. So I know we have a question from Noah in the Q&A, and we also got a question from Chris Brucci from the Eventbrite talking about playing characters of different genders. So Noah is asking specifically voicing characters of other genders. Coming from a man's point of view, how do you feminize your voice? Any tips on that? So I guess that would go to Marc. And then Chris Brucci, who I presume is a woman from the way she's phrased this, is she's asking about creating multiple male voices. So I'll send that one over to you, Ulka, so that how do you create multiple male voices and keep, I mean, I'm sure it's like creating other character voices, but when your voice is female, how do you do that?
For me, it's sort of an intonation where perhaps like the heroine or the female will be asking, but what do we, I'm trying to think of a question. But where have you been? She said. And then I'll probably interject with, I haven't been anywhere. It's sort of like it comes down. I'm not really lowering my voice so much as I'm the curve of my voice is going down. So I'm talking like this and I'm going down. And I kind of think of like the hero voice is probably like, you know, the good looking dude of the whole cast. Like he's the star. And then if there's like a sort of like a creepy nemesis or something, the voice is still going down, but maybe there's rasp and this and and like grit and I'll get you yet. I played several sort of characters. They're always fun to do, but it's really like the curve of the musicality of the voice.
Yeah, and I think it's like also just like we talked about before, those text cues, right? Like you learn something about someone, you're like, oh, I know this dude. I've met this guy before. Like I'm gonna do that guy's voice, you know. But I think, you know, and Marc will let you answer, but I just want to jump in and say, you know, I think what we always tell actors to avoid is just taking the most generic voice they think is male or female or of any gender and saying, you know, this is what this gender sounds like, and then going from there. I mean, these are human beings, these characters are humans, and we should treat them as such. They're all going to sound differently, etc. Marc, how about you? I mean, you have a much lower register.
Yeah, it's a lot more difficult. It's like, you know, kids' voices. I don't do a lot of kids' voices. It sounds like I'm trying to lure them into the van with a candy bar. Sorry. I mean, it's like it's too deep. Female voices occasionally, depending on what it is, usually softer rather than, but just like you were saying, there may be some called that it's a little more forceful, that it's got almost that Linda Hamilton-ish kind of feel from Terminator. That's very, you know, she's, you know, beautiful, but boy, she takes no crap from anyone, you know, that kind of a feel. But usually now I find, now see, it's interesting with audiobooks because you've got longer formats. Sometimes if you're using, you know, a full cast thing, which is different, but if it falls directly on the narrator, like, you know, with you, I mean, it's you've got that power to switch. And yeah, I probably wouldn't do a lot of that for fear, obviously, of getting repercussions that people would be very upset. If it calls for, you know, lighter sounding voices, sometimes they'll use a cue and go, we want a voice that's very much like, you know, it's like Roseanne if she was Truman Capote. I mean, it's like, huh? You know, so you have to kind of stop and go, okay, let's see, where are we going with this? You know, so it's that style of stuff, but you want to make sure that you're not, you know, getting, you know, like gender kind of thing that immediately just getting into this kind of thing, or getting into that, you know, very, you know, does this lift and separate, you know, kind of thing. I mean, it's just kind of, it's too, you know, it's too much. So it really depends on what the script is for and what they're looking for. But now I think we're a point where everybody realizes you're absolutely right. Everybody's human. Everybody has, we're all humans. We have different styles, different techniques, different pacing to our voices. And so many times they'll bring someone who will actually do that. And that way there is not, they don't even think about it because that's what their voice is.
Well, and I think, Ulka, you can probably talk about this. I mean, when you're in audiobook recording as opposed to some of these other mediums, you're also in it for the long haul, right? Like you've got an 8-hour day or something, and you know, we often say to an actor, if they overcommit and almost do something that's so over the top, even with just a standard character voice of like a creature or something, it's like, hey, you're gonna have to voice this creature for a week. Like it's gonna damage your voice if we keep doing it, if we go this far, right? So are you thinking about the long game when you're doing an audiobook too and character voices?
I am. And I try not to, unless it's a character that appears just for a snippet, and I'm like, okay, we we made that choice. Thankfully, this character has a short stay in this book. But yeah, for sure, because you don't want to ruin your voice, you don't want to overtax it, and then it of course affects all the other voices and any other work you're doing at the same time. So yeah, there's often no need to, because I feel like if you overdo it, then you want to leave some to the imagination, almost to the reader, to the listener. Just like in a book, you paint the picture and then your imagination fills in the rest. So I think that's a good way to go about it, and not taxing your voice, or not, you know, going too crazy with everything. And you don't have to stray too far, is what I think the takeaway is.
Yeah, I always think of Kurt Cobain talking about, like, I don't want to be singing Smell Like Teen Spirit when I'm 60, because I'll never be able to maintain that. I just want to sit around and sing acoustic songs if I get to that age. Obviously.
Well, thankfully, with things like Warcraft and Oryx and that kind of stuff, Agent, we usually book that on Fridays when we did all the dialogue replacement for the Warcraft movie. Everybody was like, yeah, great job, man, see you tomorrow, you know, dazzling throat coat, and just like, you know, because it's like, can't Oryx just do it? Oh god, that you know, it's like very, you know, and you do that for 4 or 5 hours, and yeah, you sound a little worried.
Especially if you're doing efforts, those are,
oh yeah,
always leave them to the last,
the
last day, the last end of the week.
The volume on those is usually just full blown.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So continuing on that topic, we have a lot of questions about kind of vocal health. Do you guys warm up before every session, or do you not need to, or do you have any warm up routines?
I do, not a lot. It doesn't take me long. I just sort of like warm up my voice. I do sort of like jaw exercises, you know, twisting the tongue this way and that. I'll put like a cork in my mouth and like read a couple paragraphs just to get the tongue mobile again, and hydrate. And for long haul books, long haul days, I'll usually have like a nice thing of tea. People say don't drink coffee. I'm like, no, I drink the coffee. So like, no, that it doesn't count. I will have coffee, but then I will have tea later on, like a throat coat or a Egyptian licorice. Those are my favorites.
Yeah, I think you have to do what works for you, because there's plenty of actors that usually, like, they'd walk in with a giant coffee and, you know, just having smoked 2 cigarettes, and you're like, I would not encourage any of this, but evidently you're the champ. Yeah. You just knocked out 8 hours, so I'm not going to. Don't mess with success. What about you, Marc?
Yeah, a little bit. I'll just, like getting mouth just stretched and stuff, and just kind of, singing to myself because I'm singing better. So I'll just go in the booth where no one can really hear me. And just, just loosen up a bit. But you're right. I always have multiple things of room temperature water, or water and lemon, or throat coat, or just so you can kind of just keep things going. And most of the time directors are pretty sensitive to that. They'll go, you know what, you want to continue on, or why don't we take 10 and just kind of recoup, and sometimes I have a steam shower at the house, and sometimes that works very nice over the weekend to kind of, but honestly, the biggest thing of all, and my girlfriend loves it, is shut up. If you really beat your voice up, you just have to, there's not really much else you can do other than to just be quiet. So
yeah, I think sometimes that's the best advice. Like, just don't talk tonight. Go home, read a book. Don't even read. Just rest your eyes. Just sit and listen to an audiobook for 3 hours.
Well, another good thing, actually, sorry, is
no, you go.
Yoga, because it just helps circulation, and it opens everything up, and it actually does help the voice specifically. There's one of the tenets of yoga is doing yoga, you will have a beautiful voice. I'm like, okay, it helps with the voice culture, as as they say.
I haven't heard of that yet. That's an amazing tip.
Breathe out.
So on maybe the opposite end of that spectrum, we got a question in from Bill Lord from the Eventbrite, and can you guys demonstrate shouting without not actually shouting into a mic? Because he's very curious about, for instance, in an audiobook, when it says he or she shouted, how do you do that without actually shouting into a microphone?
Well, I have 2 ways, or a combo of 2 ways. I might just, if someone's saying get over here, he said, as they ran across the hill, I'd be like, get over here, as they ran across the hill. I might shift my mouth a little bit, but you don't want to do that too much. Or I might just, it's a mixture of projection and reining in. So something like, get over here. So the intensity will convey the shouting more, and you don't need the volume.
Yeah, it's kind of like in the back of your throat, as opposed to kind of like,
yes.
Yeah.
It traps it here. You can hear it when you're saying it, but in an audiobook, it sounds perfect.
Well, it really depends too on how many people, and that's, are you talking to? Because I've run into a lot with the video games. We always talk about, is it very personal? Like you're talking like, get over here, loud, get over here. And then it's get over here. It's like, there's, it's ramping up that degree. And it's like, because you have those where you're calling the minions to action, and everybody into war, and they'll say full blown, battle cries. But again, you can still have intensity without, I laugh and always tell people, when you see an exclamation mark, it doesn't mean it means you can have intensity. It's not, I've never seen a casting director go, wow, come here and listen to how he's yelling. It's like, you can still be intense. It just depends on how many people you're yelling at, basically.
Yeah, and I think the simple technique, at least in the audiobook studio, is always like, okay, let's back off the mic about 2 feet and do your yell, but just don't do it directly into the microphone, and let's try it that way. So sometimes I think a lot of it is distance from the mic.
And engineers with really good limiters.
Yeah, and really good limiters, and a good engineer. So I think we have time for one more quick question, and I want to get Tiffany Morgan's question. Ulka, you can start on this one, because I know you're such a good audiobook narrator, but best practices or advice on the balance between narration and performance. So, how do you manage something we preach a lot about on this show, just being able to kind of just balance narration and then character voices? What are your tips in that?
Well, narration is always, I sort of start from my voice, the center. And then there's also you don't want to don't have your own opinion creeping into things. Like you can hear that in an audiobook. If you can hear if someone, oh, this narrator didn't like that book, or they had some opinions about the character. You can hear that creeping in. It's funny. It's a very subtle thing, but you can hear it. So I try to keep all like judgment out of it. And so the narration is there's some narration which might be more distanced, which might be like, here are some things that these people are doing in this world, in this life. And I have no comment on it, but I'm not invested in it. There's that kind of narration. There's the kind of narration where the narrator is a good friend, theoretically, of the protagonist. So you'll always sort of be on their side, or it's like through the lens of the protagonist, if it's not a first person book. So there's those couple types of narration. And then character voices are the characters don't, maybe the narrator knows how this is all going to unfold. The characters do not. So things are new to them, things are fresh to them. They're confused, they're shocked, they're upset, they're elated. So that freshness, that new experience has to come through. So that's kind of the difference. That's how I delineate both things. I hope that answers the question.
Can I just say that Jules and I have been talking to actors for a very long time, and this question comes up a lot, but that is one of the most eloquent answers I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Actor, I'm not kidding. That it was one of the best answers I've ever heard on that topic. So we're keeping that, and we're going to keep it on replay for the rest of the year.
Yes, and share it around.
Marc, do you have any tips?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. What she said. Yeah, it to me, the narrator, that's your authenticity. That's your authentic person that's leading you through the story and setting up it's almost like we're going down the path, and the narrator is just telling you a story, and as the characters pop up, you're kind of setting up that character, what's happening with this character, where they're going, what they're going to be, or what they just did, and you may comment on it. Like you said, you don't necessarily want to bring your own feeling. Well, that was really, God, what an ass. You don't want it. I mean, unless that's what the narrator should be doing. But usually the narrator is the one that's driving the story, and that's that authentic. It's very interesting on the piece that you played at the top with breaths. That's wonderful to have, especially in a narrative piece. It sounds authentic. It sounds real. You're telling me a story. That's really what it makes, it just draws you in, and then the characters just enhance that and just make that's like the icing on the cake for a story.
Yeah, we've gotten pretty good. I think over the years, audiobooks have gotten so clinical in the editing process that they've started taking out all the breaths, and we talk about it a lot with our team, just that people breathe, and it's okay to let them breathe in audiobooks. I think the UK is in the way the BBC recorded things for years, there was almost so much breath in all of those things that you were like, wow, there's a lot of breath. You felt like you're on stage with these actors, but and we were very clinical in the US, but now we've gotten to this point, this really nice medium kind of where everyone is just like, people breathe, and it's acceptable, and it's human. So
that's a great idea too for people that are auditioning. Don't necessarily take out you're not going to listen as a producer go, God, that's incredible, they didn't breathe in 10 minutes. So leave that in. It's okay to sound natural. It's that absolutely.
So this has been a really enriching conversation, and I know that everyone who's here today believes that too. It's time to move on to the next phase of our show today, and we're going to move on to VO Roulette. So we have Todd, you're going to correct me on your last name, but it's Todd Meneses?
Got it.
Meneses. Todd Meneses is coming up today, and we're going to ask him a few questions and see if he has a few questions for you guys. So Alexis, bring Todd right on up. There he is. There he is. Feel free to unmute, pull your camera on. You can hopefully, there he is. Hey, Todd.
Hello, Todd.
How you doing?
Hi, guys.
Todd.
How are you?
I'm doing good.
So Todd, I think we've met with you before. You've talked to Jules and I before, so not on the show, but tell everyone where you're from and a little bit about your background as an actor, as an audiobook narrator, as a narrator, voiceover.
Well, interestingly, Marc, I'm from New Orleans. originally born and raised there. I now live in Kansas, and well, it's interesting enough. I put in the chat when you mentioned about the Yat. I've been married. My wife is not from New Orleans, and we're about 30 years married, getting close to 30. My best friend is very Yat, and she still to this day cannot understand half the words he says when he speaks to me.
That's like when I talk to friends in Scotland. It's like I feel like I need subtitles.
She was the same with my father for some things too. But yeah, I did. I was in radio for about 30 years. That's where I lost my Yat accent, I think. And I always dabbled in voiceover and doing commercials and doing voices. I was part of a morning zoo and back in the 80s and was all the character guys. So it actually started with a talk with Harry Shearer, who told me, hey, you should try to start to do this for a living. So I left the radio, and that's what I'm doing now, audiobooks and different voiceovers.
Yeah, man. Nice.
Do you have a favorite project that you've done over the years, or a favorite character that has always really stood out to you?
Yeah, I like to do the evil guys. I think they're more fun. I think most people can agree with that. There was a book series I did where I had to do an evil god who was kind of speaking behind everything, and he was just very crafty and looking behind. Oh, look what he's done now. Oh, evil.
So cool.
That sort of thing. And he was pulling the strings behind the scenes type things. So that was kind of fun.
A great trick for that, just for evil guy, because that's what I play a lot of. If you ramp something down, it'll be very, like if you go like this but make it staccato and spatially work with your mic so you can get in you have no idea. It's very big and very nasty sounding. The story of my sorry. I'm sorry, I just thought it was
No,
that's exactly what I did. There was a couple of scenes where he met the hero and got in his face, that sort of thing. So
cool.
Todd, I saw the difference in your facial expressions when you got into that character. Do you also tend to physicalize, and how does that present for you?
Yeah, I think I do physicalize. That helps as well. Like Mark said, when you do the pirates, you gotta do like this and the whole arg, and you gotta get in the whole character. And some other characters I've done. I recently just did a book that should be coming out, a lit RPG, where one of the characters in the book decided he was going to be a felinian character, which is basically a cat. He was a cat character. A human cat. And so to get his voice down, he was like a tiger, so he had these fangs, so I talked like he had fangs in his mouth every time he talked. He talked like this, and that's how he spoke. So that was the change in that, from being the human, which was actually, he was a Hispanic human. His name was Mateo, so that's how he talked when he was done, till he became the character, and then he talked like that. So that's pretty much how the book went. And it's another interesting thing, kind of like what you had, Oka, when they talk in the story, because they're in the video game, they have different voices, but when they think, they're thinking in their normal voices. So I had to keep that straight as well. So
it's kind of like the technique, like all these techniques in terms of physicality, it's almost like method acting for audiobooks, right? Like I was talking to an actor like a couple of weeks ago who we were talking, he's like, there's a whole part of this where I'm like drunk, like how do you want to handle that? And I'm like, well, we could just bring vodka into the studio if you really want to do that. Like anything to get you where you have to go, let's do it.
It's funny that the Pirates of the Caribbean, that's probably the only session I've ever been in when they say, can you make him drunker? Because he's like, I give you 20 blues for the rum. And it's like, really? It's like, oh, we'll all be at the Betty Ford Clinic after this. It was kind of a weird, make him drunker. It was, I just don't hear that very often in a session.
Todd, is there a role or a book or a genre of books or content that you're really interested in pursuing that you wish you could narrate?
I get a lot of fantasy, lit RPG, horror. Slowly, I have a couple of mysteries coming up, so I'm trying to get into the mystery stuff. My wife would like me to do cozy mysteries. That's all she likes. And I said, that's pretty much dominated by female narrators. But, if there's one that comes up with a guy, I'll try for it. But yeah, the mysteries and the spy thrillers, stuff like that. I've done a couple of them, but I like to do more.
Very cool. Do you have any questions for our guests before we say goodbye for today?
Just that they're both great, and I hope to one day grow up, be one of them. That's about it.
Follow her. She's actually got talent. Don't follow me.
I follow you, Mark. You've got a lot of talent.
Well, thanks, Todd. I'm so happy that we got to see your face again and catch up just a little bit. We hope to see you soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Todd.
All right.
Great to meet
Bye,
you.
Todd.
Bye.
All right. So we've come to the final thoughts portion of our segment. So go over to Mark, I guess. Do you have any final thoughts for our audience members?
I think honestly, just be true to thine own self, and it's a very interesting road. If you're starting out, you can get a lot of interesting feedback, both positive and negative. And just stay the course. If you really want to do this, then do this. Be true to yourself. Nobody needs to be jack of all trades. It doesn't mean you can do everything. Do what you do a notch better, and then just really practice on that. I'm a firm believer in get coaching with someone that can at least point you in the direction, that knows what's going on. So if nothing else, you're familiar with what to expect in terminology and that kind of stuff. But honestly, I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful field. It's all I've ever done. It's paid for 2 divorces, 4 houses, put 3 kids through college. So this house is actually mine. I don't have to share it. But anyway, so it's it's a wonderful, wonderful business, and as long as I still love it, and the people in it are just very like this. I mean, you guys are all just very genuine and sharing, and that I love that. It's wonderful. You're all very, very good-hearted people.
And the piece of advice
back at ya.
That Mark left out: if you ever need a really good studio in LA, look up Marc Graue Studios.
Oh, yeah.
It is a fantastic facility as well.
What about you? A little plug there.
I'm going to say the short answer is what Mark said. It's definitely a wonderful, wonderful craft. And it's, if you love reading, if you love reading to people, being read to, it's a really wonderful world, the audiobook world. And the community is also very lovely, just internationally, and people I've met in person, people I've never met. And one other thing I would say is listen to audiobooks if you want to get into audiobooks. And I listen to other people's audiobooks all the time. Part of me is thinking, oh, they did that, or they did this. Or I'm like, oh, I can, sometimes like, oh, I can tell when they redid that portion because they had a pickup there. Okay, I can hear that, but they did it really well. Also, like, see what people are doing and how they're voicing things and the choices they're making with their voices, and you can learn so much and also enjoy a wonderful book at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
Dan, how about you?
It's going to sound simple, but like, don't forget to breathe. I mean, I think that's something I took from this, not only just in the studio, but metaphorically when you're working in any form of voiceover. Don't forget to breathe. Take a step back, take a breath, think about what you're doing, and and use your tool as best you can, but always don't be afraid to take a step back and think about what you're doing. So breathe metaphorically, and also just breathe when you're in the studio, because we want to hear that.
Yeah, we want you to breathe. This was just, for me, just very refreshing in terms of just hearing you guys perform a little bit throughout this segment. Sometimes we don't have actors who will perform on camera, and I feel like I miss being in the studio so much. So this has been really inspiring and refreshing for me. And just a little assignment for the audience, physicalize your characters, see how that goes, try out a different thing or two. And if we pull you up on VO roulette next time, I'd love to hear how that goes for you. So yeah, thank you guys.
What a pleasure to thank you guys so much for having me here. And okay, I'm a huge fan. Obviously, you're a very, very talented lady. And it's just,
Likewise.
you know, and seriously, this was great. I thank you so much for having me. And you know, again, just hang in. Anybody, you know, we all have ups and downs in life. You know, this is where you're going to want to be. The path is never straight. You'll be all over the place, but you will get there eventually.
Jules, should we just talk about what's next month?
Yeah,
I'm really
why don't you
excited.
take it away?
On November 4th, 4 p.m. Eastern, Ahab Breakdown, it's going to be all about crafting your online presence. Something we had a lot of questions from actors about. How do I kind of promote myself online? How do I promote myself in general without, you know, annoying a bunch of casting directors and producers and everyone else? We're going to have Cassandra Morris, who is a fantastic narrator and VO artist, and Rachael Naylor, who is from the VO network. And I know you've worked with her a little bit, Jules. So we're really excited.
Just did a crossover episode on the voiceover network where Molly and I showed up and did a little talk with them. And so she's going to do a little talk with us. We're going to learn all about marketing. So different from the creative process, but you got to get yourself out there.
Yeah, for sure. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie and Dan, for having us. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you guys. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you next month.
All right, guys.
See you soon.
Everybody stay safe. Thank you.